This is wonderful. Oh, look, everyone out there. Kia ora koutou. Mihi aroha kia koutou katoa. What a wonderful, amazing panel we have here today. How is everyone feeling? How's your energy levels? Ka pai? Beautiful. Diwigdi Valiente is Head of Sustainability at Panama Tourism Authority. Diwi is an Indigenous climate activist from the Guna people in Panama. He communicates the story of the effects of climate change and sea level rise. He founded the organisation Hohepa-Ropiha, which means children, in Guna, to advocate for the community and bring artists to document the effects on the community. Shoshona Kish, musician and founder at World Indigenous Music Festival, Canada. She is an amazing wahine tour. She's co-launched Ishkōdé Records, a woman-led Indigenous music label that intends to do business differently from the industry at large in a manner informed by its founders' worldview as Indigenous wahine women. Kera Sherwood-O'Regan is Māori from Te Waipounamu, the South Island of Aotearoa. She is the Impact Director at Activate Agency, a social impact creative agency that she co-runs with her partner. She works with non-profits, community organisations and activists, helping to centre voices and stories of structurally oppressed peoples for social change. Her work focuses on bridging Indigenous peoples' rights, the rights of people with disabilities, and climate change and health. And like Diwi, came from attending the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference. Ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, and if you would like to introduce yourselves in your language, anei.
Na nuegambi anuga Diwigdi Valiente andule Guna Ginet. Hello, my name is Diwigdi Valiente. I'm an indigenous person from the Guna group in Panama.
Anin Bojo, Jaush Kobanese Kwe Desnikas, Megazi Dodem, Bachawanan, Donjaba, Ojibwe Anishinaabe, and Tao. My name is Shoshona Kish, and I come from a community on the shores of Lake Superior, which is the biggest freshwater lake in the world, I think. And my home is called Bachawana, which means the place of the rapids. And I am Eagle Clan and Ojibwe Anishinaabe. Very happy to be here with you all.
Tēnā kōrua, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Aura te mauka, ko Waitaki te awa, ko Tahu Pōtiki te tupuna, ko te rauaroha te marae kei Awarua, ko uinoku te marae kei Moiraki, ko Kera Sherwood-O'Regan tōku ikua. Kia ora, hello, acknowledging all of the amazing people that that I've had the privilege of sharing space with on this panel, and te Aratini. My name is Kera Sherwood-O'Regan. I am Kai Tahu from Te Waipounamu, the South Island, as has been introduced. I currently reside in Ōtautahi, whose colonised name is Christchurch, but I whakapapa across Te Waipounamu to Awarua, also known as Bluff, right down the bottom of the island, and then further up the coast in Moiraki as well. So, kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora. So our theme today is story forms that adapt, respond and endure in nature and from nature. Diwi, why is this so poignant, especially to Indigenous peoples and our voices?
Most of our languages are at risk of disappearing, and when the last elder of one of our Indigenous peoples group dies, all the knowledge that he has, all the knowledge that that culture developed over centuries or millennia will probably disappear as well. So storytelling, it's a way to keep our cultures alive, but it's also a way to connect with people that probably won't understand our values and our beliefs. However, through media and storytelling, we can connect and we can touch the hearts of the people, and we can start making changes in our daily life patterns. And in order to overcome the environmental crisis that we have right now, we as indigenous people need to pass along the message that we have gotten from our ancestors, from our grandparents and grandmothers. And in Panama, our elders have recognized that if we don't integrate the traditional values and chants and spiritual beliefs into a way that can be understood by not only our people, but the majority of Panamanians, then we are at risk of losing a lot.
Absolutely, absolutely. What do you think, Shoshona?
What? Can you ask the question again?
I suppose it's really, what are those, why should we keep this alive in terms of our stories? In your form, waiata as well. Why is it so important?
Well, I think our stories are magic. They tell us who we've been and who we are right now and who we will become. They help us dream who we might become. And I think that that's the beauty of stories, is that it isn't this static text, that it's living and growing so that it can respond to who we are right now. And this is the beautiful thing about where so many of us come from in terms of our teachings and our ceremonies and our language. They are alive. They are not a thing of the past. They are not a way of archiving. They are a way of living. And and I think even in our languages hold the DNA to our culture. The language itself is a story. And our teachings talk about the language coming directly from the land. And when there's little nuanced differences or big differences in dialect, it's because we're speaking the rocks. We're speaking the lakes, we're speaking the mountains and the valleys and the prairies, and that this informs the very sounds in our mouth. And the land is the story. And so I think that, as we are dreaming who we become, the lifting up of this for future generations is so important, and not just our future generations, but these stories that the land tells us, and the stories that we then become sort of conduits of creation and co-creating and telling and sharing. These are stories the universe needs told, and they don't need just one story. They need the Anishinaabe story, they need the Maori story, and what is the name of your nation?
Guna.
Guna, they need Guna stories in order for that story to be whole. And I think this is, we fight because we love our communities and we love our land and we love our ceremonies and traditions. But we also fight because we know that those are needed in the world, that is medicine for our brothers and sisters around the world, for us to carry that forward.
Is that adequately supported by government? Do we have enough resources? Do you all have enough resources to tell our people's stories and to record that for the future? Is there enough? Or do we need to call on for more resources?
Well, I think there's always a need for more. I think that our stories are so profoundly important. And in, Canada, there is a lot of support for the arts, and there really is a robust support of Indigenous storytelling right now that I feel very lucky to have access to. But what we're still doing is counterbalancing the silencing. And it isn't a silencing that's happened in the past. It's an active silencing of Indigenous stories. And I know that that's something that is really hard for mainstream to digest because people feel really woke right now. But the reality is that there's this deep systemic silence that's fallen across things. So right now what we're trying to do is create a vibration and a momentum to that. And I really think that the more resources that we have to do that, the stronger that vibration will be, and the more we will all be served by those beautiful voices and stories rising.
Tika tera. Kera, what are you seeing at a community level? What are you seeing in this space that excites you or gives you hope?
Oh, what gives me hope? Lots of things. No, I'm not allowed to swear on this panel. All the badass Indigenous wahine who are here and who are in various spaces that I've been in, they give me a lot of hope. I think I'd really like to pick up that thread that was just being discussed, because I think that, for me, in the mahi that I do at Activate, we're often asked, how can we, support change, social change, whether that's, on climate change, so fighting for climate justice, or working on various different social justice kaupapa or issues. And they say, oh, well, we need storytelling, but storytelling is, in some mainstream spaces, almost like the thing that they give you when they don't want to give you the actual power. But I think that this is a fundamentally flawed approach, because to me, stories are so important, and particularly Indigenous stories are so important because we make and we create the world through the stories and through the relationships that we have. And for me, storytelling is a vehicle for relationship. It gives me the opportunity to say, this is where I come from, this is the position that I'm coming from, this is the whakapapa of an issue that I'm passionate about, or my involvement with an issue, and I'm here to listen to the stories of other people. And when we have this confluence of story, that's where we're able to understand each other, where we're able to navigate how we want to create and co-create the world that we actually want to live in. And so I think to that point around like resourcing and things, for example, oftentimes we see that there is an interest in resourcing storytelling and Indigenous storytelling, or from my side, I also work at the intersection of disability as well, so Indigenous and disabled storytelling. And there is this sort of nominal support, but I think oftentimes the kinds of structures and supports that do exist really are asking us to tell a certain kind of story, and that is a certain kind of story that has been told about our people for generations, that has been told without us. And so we really need to have stories that are told by and for us, so by our community, in a way where we actually have agency, because when we see that this storytelling is that vehicle for relationship and that vehicle for social and cultural change, then us being able to tell our own stories, that's where the power actually lies to change the world. And so to go back to the piece about, what gives me hope is seeing those stories starting to emerge, seeing the amazing Indigenous, disabled, and other structurally oppressed communities saying, hey, actually, you know what, we don't want to tell this old story about, we don't want to just do, these performative things. We want to tell the real stories. And I see that there are a lot of people moving and pushing that direction, and that really gives me a lot of hope for the future of the planet.
Beautiful. We love hope. We love it. Now, Diwi, Indigenous voices, Indigenous stories alongside government policies are often like water and oil, but there is something quite revolutionary that is happening in Panama in this space. Can you elaborate more on this?
Of course. In Panama, we have 7 indigenous peoples, and they all speak a different language, and they all have different stories. But the commonality between all these stories is the connection we all have with nature and the way we see nature as being part of us, either as a relative, could be our mother, or the ocean, for example, for my people, is our grandmother. So we have to take care of our mother and our grandmother the same way our mothers and grandmothers take care of us. And we have a very interesting Minister of Tourism who is white, but in spirit is like an old elder. And he has recognized the value of these stories and traditions in order to change people's mind, but also attract something called the Discerning Traveler. This traveler that wants to experience the community, that wants to have a positive impact in the community, and that wants to learn from the community. So having understood that these values from indigenous peoples are important in order to develop tourism, the right tourism, he's been working a lot on building relationships with the elders, with the traditional authorities, with all the communities, so our stories can be heard and can be used for good. They can be used now in order to act on climate change, in order to make people realize why we have to take care of nature and start reconnecting with nature, because most of the people in the world have lost that connection that we have. Today, in the beginning of the event, in the first panel, I felt so powerful here, like hearing all these different languages and feeling connected to each one of you, because at the end, we all have the same values and we all are connected to nature in a way that people in the cities are not. So in Panama right now, we have a very good relationship with all the indigenous leaders, and they have recognized as well the importance of sharing the stories so they are not forgotten, because our chants and our traditions and our spiritual values are not being practiced anymore by the young generations. We have people that move to the cities, and when they're in the cities, they forget their names. I recently met a cab driver in Panama, and when I saw him, I knew he was Guna. And then I asked his name, and he was, yeah, my name is Giancarlo. I was like, Giancarlo. And then we started talking. I told him my name was Diwigdi, and he was like, yeah, I recognize that name from the beginning. And then he told me that 10 years ago, he changed his original name.
Oh, no.
So we are still living in a society that made us feel ashamed of our traditional names. And now, giving power to our elders and to our traditions, we have a chance to feel proud again and to feel recognized as the leaders we should be.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, Shoshona, one of your main concerns is with issues like narrative sovereignty and keeping ownership of songs in the hands of artists. Can you elaborate further on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the reach of colonialism has no bounds in some ways. And so the encroaching on our stories and our languages and our very DNA mapping is an issue. But I think when we're talking about narrative sovereignty, it's bigger than that. It's about us speaking for ourselves, which circles around to what you were saying. It really is about self-determination. And when we are trying to discuss ownership in the context of colonialism, we, I think, lose our way very quickly. The ownership of those songs is really not about, I don't even know how to say those things, like what it is, I know what it is about. It's about our care for those songs and for those stories, our responsibility for those songs and those stories, in the same way that when we speak about ownership of land, it's just, those words don't speak to our values. We are talking about the privilege of that responsibility to care for our first mother and to care for those ancestral stories and that ancestral knowledge. And so when we look to copyright law to provide a guide to that care, we really, I think, find ourselves in deep waters. So my interest in narrative sovereignty is first about self-determination. Secondly, about, the protocol around those things and our own laws and how we can stand in those laws and find a meaningful intersection with things like copyright so that we can protect them in a national and global colonial space.
Kera, would you like to elaborate further on any of these?
Oh, sure. I just wish I could have like a big stamp and like co-sign what Shoshana has just said. I don't know that I can really add a huge amount other than to just, to really tautoko, to really support what she's already said. And I think that's something that we're also exploring in the work that I do, because I think, you know, to that point, it is that kind of thing where we're often asked to perform or tell story within this Western paradigm, and then you're constantly looking, you know, looking at ourselves, but through a Western lens and through a colonized gaze, and then honestly, that can mess you up a little bit as, you know, as an individual and as an Indigenous person and trying to navigate our own identities. And it's really liberating when we actually get to be in those spaces with other Indigenous peoples, or in spaces where we're, you know, permitted to, or actively ourselves just go and take the space to tell stories for ourselves. And we're not telling it because we're telling it for some other people and wanting them to, you know, give us power. It's actually saying, this is who we are, this is where we come from, this is what we know to be true and how we want to change the world. And we're able to stand in that power. And I think it is really important, because we do have to recognize that even within our own communities, you know, there are some of those struggles, and I can absolutely understand for some folks, you know, it's really hard to get space. It's really hard as an artist or a storyteller to get paid and to be able to, you know, in this society that we live in, folks have to pay their bills, folks have to be able to put kai on the table for their whānau. And so it can be really difficult. But I think that when we're able to have those conversations around what does it mean to collectively own a story, because, you know, if I'm standing here on a stage or on a platform and saying this is what it means to me to be, you know, a kaitahu wahine, well, what is the responsibility that I have back to my people? Because that's not just my story alone. And so it is this thing about those rights and the responsibilities and navigating that collectively. And I think when we can do that, and when those stories are held within the context of good whanaukataka, good relationship, then that's again going to be much more powerful and much more impactful for creating change than if we just try to take the narratives at this very superficial level that we're often asked to do.
Yeah, I think that's really important. You know, the depths and the context are so important.
And I think also that if you are actually conscious about the relationship you have to build in order for you to have these stories as part of your own story, especially if you're not Indigenous, it's very important to build this relationship and to make our elders and our relatives understand that we are trying to share the stories not to get an economic profit of it, but actually to make good.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, the relationality at the center of everything, you know, our relationship with one another and our relationship with our first mother, our relationship with our ancestors, those who came before and those who are yet to come. I think that that's one of the beautiful things about, you know, one of those shared values and ways of knowing and being that we bring together. And that's why gatherings like this are so important. Because as we are figuring out and navigating things like narrative sovereignty and how to protect, you know, these things that we have a responsibility to, we need each other. We need each other's wisdom, and we need that full circle of relationality and perspectives. And I think that that medicine is what's going to help all of us do the work we have ahead.
Perfect, beautiful. And that's our time up. Ngā mihi, kia koutou katoa.